Thank you for joining us. My name is Pfeiffer Garbisi, and I am an immersive media producer and director. Over this past year, I kept being confronted with this question: can VR create real change? With wildfires out of control in California, pandemic, division, and the threat to our democracy, I just kept wondering, what kind of world is my work creating? What kind of world do I want to create? So today, I want to introduce you to 3 visionaries who have pioneered virtual reality, emphasized impact, and do groundbreaking work to ensure this medium has a positive effect on people and the planet. First of all, Nani de la Peña, the godmother of VR.
Hi, thank you so much for having me and for coming to watch, and I really appreciate the entire team at South by Southwest for their efforts to make this thing work. So just as a word of background, I came from print journalism. I had worked on this cover story for Newsweek magazine, and that cover piece really was about how do we put you on scene, through text and experiencing what was going on across the nation. Similarly, when I worked on documentary films later, we did something we called cinema verite, where we tried to record live moments and put you on scene while the real world was unfolding in front of you. I took all those ideas, basically taught myself to code, and with a lot of help, began to make pieces. The first, I think most people know, is I made a virtual, accessible version of Guantanamo Bay alongside digital artist Peggy Weil, and that came from a section in one of those documentary films. We learned a lot about Guantanamo Bay Prison and felt that it wasn't really being represented. You couldn't get there, journalists couldn't get there, no one could get there. So we wanted to make a version that people could be there and understand what's going on. This was in contrast to real but inaccessible prison camp. Then I took this into class at USC, which was making a web documentary essentially about hunger in the 2008 downturn. And along with an intern, we started recording audio at food banks. I wanted to use virtual reality to put people on scene during a real incident. Okay, we're slowing down a little bit. There's too many people. There's too many people. Okay. Or somebody just Okay, he's having a seizure. Okay. And that incredible audio of a man with diabetes never getting to food. His blood sugar dropped too low and he collapsed into a diabetic coma. And we decided to make a piece that puts you at that moment when he was there. And I have to say that it was terrible back then, but apparently the heads of the national regional food banks are saying that the hunger in America right now is way worse. I think this piece still has relevance. But that, my attempt to do this was $700 my own money. This is what we came up with, Hunger in LA. And even though it had plenty of jankiness and problems, it was still powerful to bear witness to what was going on. And that ended up in the Sundance Film Festival, became the very first VR piece there. And really, this is how I launched my career. So since then, we've made all kinds of stuff. We're well known for making pieces about Syrian refugees and solitary confinement and many other stories. And even this one, which is more recently recorded on a Microsoft stage. I kind of like this because I think it's the first volumetric kiss. These two used to compete against each other, and then they competed in college, and actually now they're engaged to get married. So anyway, that's about me.
Hi, I'm Gabo Aurora, and I'm an immersive artist, a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and a former UN diplomat. It was at the UN that I founded UNVR, where I had my first foray with virtual reality. I was drawn to VR and that was around 2014. I was drawn to VR because I had this feeling that it was going to help communicate and develop an emotional engagement with issues at the UN that a lot of our other traditional ways of communicating weren't doing. I was mostly writing reports and trying to get people to care and understand about what was happening all over the world. And it was met with consistent sort of indifference until I was able to make my first VR documentary, Clouds Over Sidra, which I made in partnership with Chris Milk and his company Within. And making Clouds Over Sidra was an incredibly eye-opening experience. We made it in 48 hours in Zatari camp, where I went with Barry Pausman, and we just didn't know what we were doing, and we just tried to get whatever footage we could. But the idea was to really give a sense of the reality of a young girl living there and the day in the life of what it would be like. And we made it, and it premiered at Sundance in 2015. It was also shown at Davos to a lot of leaders and has subsequently gone on to raise an enormous amount of money for the Syrian cause, and I think has made a lot of people understand what the emotional possibilities are with this medium. So for me, that's who I am, and that's how I got started. And what keeps me going is that the technology continues to evolve and the possibilities also. So really happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Kieran. I'm the Director of EarthXR Programming and Partnerships. I'm also super excited to be here. I kind of fell in love with festivals with South by Southwest, so I appreciate everybody tuning in virtually. So I kind of come from a background having worked a lot in live action, indie films, animation, and also having a strong history working in nonprofits and causes, from refugee relief to anti-trafficking, anti-poverty campaigns, and working directly with people in shelters. And you know, the convergence I'm in kind of with EarthXR now is we are the immersive branch of EarthX, which is the world's largest environmental experience. And I like to say we work for the whales and dolphins and the elephants and rhinos. And we really use these AR, VR, MR, you know, immersive experiences under that XR umbrella to kind of take people into nature and get them to, you know, kind of fall back in love with nature.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to dig into this today. This is more than just a panel about VR. To me, this is a panel about how media technology shapes the world. And VR is an excellent lens to view the media technology space because it amplifies all of the key issues, from privacy to psychological effects of content and more. But first, let's start out by understanding what makes VR unique. Nani, can you share what made you pursue working in this medium before most people had even heard of it?
One of the things that really interests me is this idea of duality of presence. And duality of presence basically means that you feel the sensation that you're at two places at once. And that feeling of being there is really, these were actually images from opening night of Hunger in LA at Sundance, where, you know, I really didn't know how people were going to react. But there they were down on the ground with a person who wasn't there, trying to touch them. The goggles you could see out the sides, so it wasn't like they didn't know they weren't in that room. They just felt like they were both places at once. And I think that impact is really important, right? It has a really interesting and extraordinary immersive impact. And for me, who wanted to tell stories about Anastasio Hernandez Rojas on the left, who was beaten to death and tasered to death by Border Patrol, or Kinney, who's on the right, who spent and was literally caused a mental break for him, years in solitary confinement. You just have a very difficult time putting people on scene in these stories without access, and VR lets you do that. And this is a short little clip that also shows you what happens.
40% of homeless youth come from the LGBTQ community because they've been thrown out from their homes due to their sexual orientation. After I gave my talk at TED Women, the actress Sara Ramirez approached me, and she really wanted to make this piece about homelessness in the LGBTQ community. In collaboration with the True Colors Fund, I was lucky enough to begin working with them on finding the right material to tell the story. We ended up using the audio of Daniel Pierce, who was thrown out by his own family, and he happened to record the terrible confrontation that ensues.
Get off of me! What's wrong with you? You're a damn queer! What's wrong with you?
So by putting the audience in the middle of this physical moment, you know, using the motion capture, putting on digital characters, and then making it life-size so it happens all around you, it's so startling. Suddenly this thing you've heard, which is disturbing enough, and maybe you've watched videos of this type of scene, But if it's there and you feel physically vulnerable, you connect to Daniel and to what he's going through in a way that I don't think any other medium affords. It is a really significant and powerful moment to be there with Daniel when he's that vulnerable, when he's surrounded by people who hate him just for being who he is.
You're twisting my words. You are
twist everybody.
You are a completely different person.
Let me tell you something. You little pieces.
But we also use new technologies, something called volumetric capture, which is with a company called 8i, in which we film from every direction around a person, and it creates a hologram. And we use that moment, that technology, as kind of a postscript to offer messages of hope, to be able to give people some ideas of, how you can get to the other side.
All right, thank you. And Gabo, could you share a little bit about what made you start creating VR and why you continue this mode of storytelling?
I feel, that a lot of the traditional media that's out there, I never really felt it could express what I would feel about, living and working in places all over the world that I did as when I was with the UN and as a humanitarian. And I think it was more a way to find a medium that would help express a lot of the respect and the awe one feels for the human spirit when it's kind of in very different and challenging circumstances. And I think we have a very stereotyped view of what people go through and how people live. And I think there is a chance now with this medium, with virtual reality, to kind of give some of the nuance and help understand something in ways that are not just binary, like good or bad, or or other ways that we think about it. And I think we also don't understand as much. It's still a medium that's not been perverted by advertising and propaganda yet. And I think we don't realize how much traditional media is in a way manipulative. And I think we have to keep fighting to make sure this isn't as manipulated.
I completely agree. Tiffany, can you speak to your journey into the VR space?
So it kind of started with me, as I mentioned, I was like working in these studio systems. We were actually kind of early on starting to take on a lot of like entertainment VR projects. And it was around that time that I, was working on a fundraiser with Navajo Water Project and had been invited out to the reservation and was seeing this kind of like devastating landscape that was extremely difficult to translate to anybody, like how remote it was and how challenging the situations were. And I just couldn't imagine that translating back through a film landscape. And it was around that time that we were also, starting to look into more of how VR was being used for social good. And I can say Nani's work was definitely one of the early, impact motivators on that. And I kept thinking that if you could put somebody in a VR headset, in that huge landscape, you could actually really get somebody to feel like they were there. And when I was working with Jaisha Patel on Notes to My Father, which is a VR piece about a child trafficking survivor, there's a super impactful moment in that where Jaisha was very adamant to tell that from the trafficking survivor's point of view. And having worked in anti-trafficking for a long time, that's a very difficult place to get people to relate to. And there's a moment where this young child is on a train and she's being leered at by all these men surrounding her. And that spooked so many people out, and it was so disturbing. And that's when I started really realizing that that was where people were going to start to have these kind of far more critical accelerations of compassion for issues that they normally might say, oh, that's too remote, or that's too far away from me, or I can't relate to that. VR just so impactfully makes you feel like you're there. And it was also from there starting to hear far more from the nonprofits that we were working with. There's also a really great quote from Amnesty International: if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a virtual reality experience is worth a whole book. That's from Kate Allen. And we were also seeing that this was having like really great impact with the fundraising. And it's been in, like Growing a Wonder World discusses how it helped raise billions of dollars. So we've also seen like Conservation International feels like VR so impactful that that's how they started touring to create their impact. So it was a lot that real world translation back from the nonprofits.
Thank you so much. I wanted to touch on one of my concerns with this medium, which is that it requires expensive specialty equipment, not just for creators, but for the audience as well. And that there is a particular kind of person who's generally affluent who ends up telling stories and defining the narrative in VR. Tiffany, in your work overseeing the films that come through EarthXR, what do you see as the best solutions to ensure diversity within the narrative?
A really great example recently, so we just did a really wonderful show with Stina Hamlin, who was a co-director on a project called Blood Memory XR. She directed that with Jade Begay. And what I love so much about this project is it's an Indigenous team and that they're telling this story through an Indigenous lens. And it's a really beautiful VR project that they've also got kind of AR elements and an audio app that they're working on. It's all about pulling people into nature and telling these like ancient stories and getting people to reconnect to ancient roots. And Stina discussed how it was really important to tell that through an Indigenous lens. And in the project, they discuss the importance of not having like a voyeuristic take towards Native people. So I think that, that voice, people owning their voice and working within this industry to make sure that people are owning their voice in these projects. We also, from a partnership level, have worked with like Voices of Americua is a great example of a partner we've had where they have a whole Indigenous library. So the Indigenous lens is how everything's being seen. And we met them through, other partners we have, like If Not Us, Then Who, which is an Indigenous climate action collective, and Hip Hop Caucus. And what's powerful about that is, we know from the environmental standpoint, with Indigenous people, best stewards of the environment, over 80% of our biodiversity is protected by 5% of the population, these Indigenous populations. And so it's really important to tell those narratives with them as leaders in the field.
Really interesting work, Tiffany. It's been so fun to see all the work you guys have been able to do at EarthX. I feel lucky that I was able to inspire you at all, because you've certainly taken this and run with it and made it amazing.
Gabo, you've told stories about refugees, the homeless, among others. Are there any strategies you'd like to share with filmmakers who are telling these kinds of stories?
I think and it's probably similar, for Nani as well, obviously, I think there's always a time in a panel that if I'm with Nani, I have to say, without her sort of pioneering work, I think a lot of us wouldn't be here. But for me, I would say, I was very interested in subverting people's expectation of the technology, and I wanted it, at the UN we have a mandate to tell and try to get people to care about different issues, and it was very important that it was through the words of the people themselves, that we would work with them, we would co-create it, but in some ways that it wasn't going to be just like a diplomat or a celebrity talking about their trip, about going to a Syrian refugee camp or dealing with Ebola, or it wouldn't even be any UN worker that would get the word. And you'd be surprised. I mean, I don't want to shame the UN, but if you go to the UN's YouTube channel, that's what we had to deal with. The audience was more about showing what they had done rather than just letting people speak for themselves. And so I think it was really important with this new technology that we were able to kind of co-create it with people and really help them tell their story in that way. And I think, that is not an easy thing to do, and that's actually very controversial nowadays, where I think, we want to make sure everyone has the right to tell their own story and to do things. But, in working with VR very early, I think the idea was that this was a technology that was being said that it couldn't even tell those types of stories, that it would be about gaming and entertainment. And I think for me, showing the use cases of how we can use this to kind of connect people and to have it be about regular people, I think is what makes it very powerful. I mean, I'll always remember, being in some VC or some conference in San Francisco and people lining up to want to watch Clouds Over Sidra, and it's just, to me, it was incredible that this was going to be their first experience, and hopefully it would change their values and their way they would think about this technology and ask more from it.
Yeah, I have to say, Clouds Over Sidra, we were lucky because of you making that, Gabo. It made a lot of people go, okay, this is something, right? I was still doing the full walk around, and the distribution was just impossible at the time. And without Clouds Over Sidra, I don't think it would have been quite accepted the way that it became as a possible medium. So your role in that was huge.
Means
I
a lot
would
to
say
me.
too,
That's one of those.
I remember getting fingers pointed in my face, like, you can't do that. That'll never work. That's that's for games. You can't tell non-news stories using this medium.
Yeah.
Literally in my face, my colleagues just attacking me for wanting to use it for these kind of storytelling. So, it's a super, both in terms of how you tell the story, but also in terms of, distribution, you kind of made it viable at the get-go.
Oh, thank you.
I have to say too, with both of your projects, with Clouds Over Sidra and with Project Syria, those are early on influences too. Having worked for a long time directly with refugee populations, like especially the Rumble shirt with Project Syria, and just having a situation where you feel like you're sitting right across from somebody in that situation. Those were those impactful moments where I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to completely change this game for, how hard it is for people to tell these stories. So like, kudos to both of you.
Nani, could you share a little bit about your learnings and process democratizing the medium?
Sure. Kia tells the story of two sisters who try unsuccessfully to rescue a third sister from a fatal attack by an ex-boyfriend. And they were both had these live mics on their phone because they both called 911 that I could intercut with. And we tried to take the real stuff and really put you on scene, even with CG, of the real event. And of course, we don't put you there in the moment that the sister is killed, but by being in the room when he's holding her hostage. The two sisters we did long interviews, and they really wanted to get out this issue of domestic violence and what had happened to his sister, because it's just so, frequent. 3 women a day are killed by their domestic partners or ex-partners. So they've actually started a whole campaign for domestic violence. So I work closely with them. I think when the New York Times bought it, they felt very uncomfortable mentioning the sisters' organization. And I would say that I would have pushed back a lot harder on that, because if they're going to let me tell their story in this way and the New York Times is going to publish it, we should offer them their voice, which is they really want to say what they're doing to fight this too. And more recently, I've been really want to change who gets to tell these stories, because they're going to be expensive and hard. So we built this sort of no-code solution to let people begin to make this stuff volumetric content themselves using just buttons.
Introducing Reach, the first web platform for creating and sharing extended reality, including augmented and virtual reality, using real people and places. Built by the pioneers at Emblematic Group, Reach is an easy-to-use browser-based solution that makes the power of walk-around spatial experiences available to anyone. Reach lets you craft your own volumetric stories in a few easy steps using a no-code drag-and-drop solution. First, you access a library of 3D locations, many of them captured using stunning high-resolution photogrammetry. You can also upload locations you've created yourself. Then, use our simple tool to add your own real-life video interviews, volumetric characters, or 3D assets. Finally, you can share the results via a simple web link. Embed your finished story just like you would a video. No need for downloads or dedicated apps. Reach eliminates all the distribution barriers facing room-scale VR. Viewers can navigate stories on a smartphone, tablet, or PC or put on a headset and walk around for full immersion. Sign up now to discover how far you can reach into the future, where the stories we tell are as vivid and three-dimensional as the world we inhabit.
Thank you. And Tiffany, you've done a lot of work in creating a festival that's accessible for both creators and an audience. Could you share any suggestions you have for other festivals?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love so much about our festival is that it's free and open to the public. Especially pre-COVID, we were getting massive numbers of people. We had over 177,000 people in 2019, and when Nat Geo came on as our major partner for 2020, we were expecting over 200,000. And for a lot of people, that might be their first experience to be able to do AR/VR. This is not necessarily something that a lot of people can afford or have at home or in their schools. It's also been a priority for us in the festivals that we partner with. We've had incredible partnerships with Guanajuato International Film Festival, which has been free and open to the public for 23 years, EarthX Mexico, and Peace Boat, and other incredible partners that is a priority to them as well. And I would also say from the programming side, we worked recently with Danny Washington, who is a marine biologist and TV host, and Erica Woolsey, who's a National Geographic explorer. And they have this incredible program called 21st Century Mermaids. And it's all from an intersectional environmental lens to train kids up in STEAM and STEM, and they educate kids on VR. And it's just such a wonderful program. And we really love to program from that perspective of really kind of, again, letting people tell their own stories. And I would again go from there, when we talk about inclusion, another program that I love so much, Robin Burrell's Codebreak, she's really addressing that, we often have this conversation within our industry of how many people have a VR headset at home. And she's asking the question, how many people have a computer or internet at home? And right now, a third of US families are struggling to have a dedicated computer or internet for remote learning. And I think that's the other thing that we really have to be asking these questions of where are we looking for who all we're including. Some of the most brilliant people that I've ever worked with that have the most incredible creativity to share have been through, living in refugee camps, living in homeless shelters, surviving foster care, and we need to be inclusive of them as well.
Tiffany, you're the perfect person to dig into quantitative impact because you actually coach the participants in EarthXR about how to integrate impact into their pieces. Can you talk a little bit about this process?
Yeah, so we have a few models that we use in terms of encouraging impact. And I will say it is the kind of the first question we give to a lot of filmmakers when they want to be part of our festival is, we always make it clear that it's very important to us that when people come out of an experience, that they know what to do next, that we not just tell them, stories about endangered species or overpolluted waters, but that they know what to do next. And one example of that is lifestyle changes that some of these projects encourage. And there's a really wonderful project from Mary John Frank that we're working with now from Sea to Rising Sea. And it's super fun. She's used synchronized swimming as part of this. But it also teaches people about how to look into climate jobs and how their investments are impacting the environment and voting. It's a super fun project, but it's also encouraging people to change their daily lifestyle for the environment. Another way that we really encourage impact is through filmmakers that literally are changing, government policy. And one of the examples we have of that, I mentioned we've worked a lot with EarthX Mexico and Guanajuato International Film Festival. That's been a really wonderful collaboration. And they had asked us at one point to take VR projects so that they could show the Mexican Senate. And they have been working in Mexico on bans on plastics, and they've credited our festival with part of that banning plastics work, which is super exciting to us. And we have certain filmmakers that we work with. Ghost Fleet was a project about the kind of intersection of illegal fishing and human trafficking, and Guardians of the Kingdom was about stopping whaling in Tonga. And we've gone with them to the UN, to the Peace Boat, They've, worked with the Tongan ambassadors. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful in that is, we had this moment on the Peace Boat where there was one of the survivors of human trafficking from Ghost Fleet that was like there, telling, like they were there telling their stories, and you see that full turnaround of the impact of these campaigns. Ghost Fleet got to over 12 million people. And it also has that critical impact for that individual whose life was altered through that. And the other super fun way that we've shown impact is fundraising. Dance with Flamingos is one of my favorite examples of that. Kristen Lucas does an incredible job of always tying in endangered species fundraising into her projects. And so she had this kind of mirror project where you could dance like a flamingo with flamingos. And she called it Flamingos, AR in there. And 50 flamingos were adopted through that. She raised awareness of the how the flamingos are on the red list for endangerment, and 17 of the flamingos that were adopted were through our festival.
That's so great. I can't wait to dance like a flamingo. So Nani, you've had similar successes with your work. Do you tell us about the impact they've had and how you measured that impact?
We did some studies around Greenland melting, and we found that people actually really responded in a much more successful way to the material.
Well, when you look at the glacier like that, from the vantage point of an helicopter, it looks like it's going to be here forever. How could it possibly go away?
The glacier retreated more in the last 15 years than in the previous 70 years. We'd like to know why.
And now when you're talking about climate change, right? This is really important because by being there, you stop thinking, oh gosh, the scientists are just making stuff up. When you're in a plane with the NASA scientists, as they're dropping a thermometer, off the back of the plane, that feels like something you could personally do. And I feel like, right now when we need to battle so much disinformation, even though it's virtual, it can offer a real opportunity to set the record straight. And similarly, we can create some ways to bridge divides with this Planned Parenthood piece where we put you on scene where you're yelled at in the same way that young women are yelled at when they go into these clinics. This is a guy who's lip syncing real audio, right?
You're a whore!
When we took that out onto the road to see how people would react to it, even the most conservative communities felt that women should not be treated that way. It didn't matter if they were pro-abortion or anti-abortion. The middle ground was that young women should not be treated that way. And that's pretty profound of a shift and a change, and a middle ground that I think we need to find more of, obviously, in this very divided nation.
Gabo, you mentioned Clouds Over Cedra. How did that come to be, and what did that teach you about the impact this medium could have?
Yeah, so, when I made Clouds Over Cedra, I could feel like I had this magic thing in a headset that I would put on people's head one by one, and they would be really moved, and they would, there would be a big reaction, and people wanted to do something. And I think I couldn't quite figure out what the next step would be of how one could take something that's so limiting, that was just in a very, I think at one point Samsung said I had more headsets than anyone in the world. They had given me like 200 for Davos, like before they were ever made, and they just said you there's nobody. I had the Guinness Book of World Records of most headsets anybody at one time, and so we packaged these up and we just started sending them to different donor conferences for Syria, and that was our first sort of thinking, like, let's try to influence decision makers and bring these magical headsets and do that. And that actually ended up making an enormous difference, because Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General at the time, would give a little speech, and we would put everybody at the Secretary of State level, before they would make their commitments to Syria, and have them mandatorily watch Clouds Over Sidra on a headset, and then come out of it, and then the Secretary General will be like, well, what are you going to give now? And it would be, we far exceeded all of the projections, because I think, of course, people felt more moved and committed. But then at some point, we said, that's fine for, very powerful people. What can we do to kind of bring this change to regular people? And I realized that at that point, Google Cardboard and very low-cost ways were being very prevalent, and that you could turn your phone into a VR device, your smartphone. And so I realized that there are face-to-face fundraisers for UNICEF all over the world, in 40 different countries, in 15 different languages, and that is some of the most significant way that UNICEF raises money on a micro way across the world. And we realized that if we gave the option for a lot of these people, stopping people, that maybe we can make a 2-minute version of Clouds Over Sidra, and people could watch it, and we can measure how much they would give with VR and without VR. And it was really incredible to see that it would consistently double donations, first in New Zealand, and then we piloted this project, and then we had it all over the world, and it's continued even to this day. There's probably someone somewhere watching it and giving more money as a result. And after that, I think we were thinking, the money is really interesting. How do we continue to think about other ways we would do it? And one of the most impactful things I did afterwards was I made My Mother's Wing, which was about Gaza, and we started showing it on the streets of Tel Aviv, just to have conversations and do baseline questionnaires of what people felt about Palestinians in Tel Aviv. And that, there are many, many ways that you can go with it, but that was, I think, the first sort of thing about impact that I was pretty astounded by. But there's so much more to be done.
Well, I think we get a lot of pushback on, is VR the empathy machine, right? Or that, as if, it's kind of taken out of context, because this idea that, wow, you put on the headset and bang, you're going to feel some empathy is of course it's nonsense. You've got to have storytelling, and the better the storytelling, and we've talked earlier about how important it is to include the communities whose stories you're telling, and working together or helping them tell their own stories. That's really valuable. But I just want to, make it really clear that can VR, the whole part of this panel is, can VR, make change in the world? And I think clearly already we've shown in multiple examples in how it has done so. But we also are following in the footsteps of film and television and audio, and we are another medium. It's just, what's different is we're allowing people to step into a volumetric space. We're allowing them to see in every direction like they do in the physical world, and that offers some really new embodied sensations. We don't just see the world with our eyes. When you go to a movie theater, something scary happens, you jump. And I think VR takes advantage of that. And I do believe that with good storytellers and the kind of thoughtfulness that Gabo and Tiffany bring to this medium, we really can see some important change.
No, I think that's, I've seen it time and time again. What you say, Nani, is right. I mean, so much emphasis on the virtual reality and not as much on the storytelling. And, I think that's what's kind of made people forget how hard, how absolutely hard it is to tell good stories in VR and to make it work, and how it's even harder when we're working in a new medium, and we know that if we get it right, it can have the impact, as we are proving that, and there are all these things. But each time when you come back to the drawing board and you start again, as the technology evolves, as things get is not all, to figure out how to tell those narratives and what would work. I think we cannot underestimate that is what I think is making the change. And you're very right. It is important not to forget that. And that's so easily forgotten because I think everyone focuses on what this technology can do because it's so transformative for human experience and what we can do and be and feel and see and experience. But I think that core thing of what makes us human is the story. And I think figuring out how to make that merge with what this is what makes the difference. And without it, I think there's going to be no change, So it's about getting more storytellers excited and to work to kind of tell those stories that you were saying. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, I would say from our perspective, kind of being very much immersed in the environmental space and knowing what's at stake. We know the house is on fire. Like, we don't have time. And what's the honor in my position is we get to work with a lot of these filmmakers that are very much the firefighters, and they are creating XR content where they're putting out the fires, they're training other firefighters, they're training people at home how to be firefighters and how to do like the kind of like critical work to create impact. Where I get really confused is when I see a lot of work programmed often, or people kind of creating content where the message is, it's extremely expensive CG nightmare, a dystopian project where the firefighters die and the earth dies and we all die and then we're zombies on Mars in 2080 because we killed the earth, and there's no impact tie-in. And that always is a bit heartbreaking to me because a lot of the people that we're working with are very much people that are kind of getting these stories told, where they're in between the whale and the whaler, they're in between the elephant and the poacher, and they're very much working on the ground to do that critical work so that those, endangered species are getting the attention that they need, the awareness that they need, and getting notoriety to the causes that they need. And that's why we really love working with, certain creators like a Habitat XR or the Outlaw Ocean or Underwater Earth. We always know that they're going to create that critical impact, but that takes resources and they need investment in what they're doing. And so that's just kind of like my big message on environmental work, that if we are going to program and curate environmental work, that it really leads by protecting those protectors.
Thank you, Tiffany. I cannot agree more. When discussing the impacts of a technology, it's also important to think of the potential risks. This particular study comes to mind considering increased privacy concerns with VR technology. The Virtual Human Interaction Lab published in Nature that with 5 minutes of VR tracking data, even with all other identifiable information taken off, they could identify a user out of a pool of 500. So it aggravates the current need for more privacy in the technology space. And I'd like to open this question up about the other issues that we might need to create and address within our infrastructure. Nani, are there certain things you think we should be wary of in pursuing this technology?
All the way through history, technology has been used for propaganda, for both good and for evil. We know how evil it was to use film to fake the way that Jews were being treated in Nazi Germany. It's also been used for like things you wouldn't expect, like the Rosetta Stone was actually a taxation document, right? So no doubt VR is going to be used at some point as a way to track you and collect your taxes. But I do worry about who also is in charge of the way the technology is used. I think that as I told you, I'm a bit disturbed by what the founder of the Oculus Rift ended up doing. He, I don't care if he was even joking around with these guys to, have himself making what's considered the white supremacist symbol with somebody who's a Holocaust denier, makes me very uncomfortable that this person's ethical approaches are so what's the word, even confused, I guess is a complimentary way I can put it, that he should be allowed to be creating like a VR surveillance company of the border. that makes me very uncomfortable. I feel like we have to be thinking about who gets to use the technology, how they get to use it, and what's the transparency behind it.
Yeah, but I think it goes deeper, Nani, where it's not just one person. I mean, the companies that control the fate of VR, right? Facebook, Google. I was reading all the op-eds, and I follow very closely Shoshana Zuboff, who writes Surveillance Capitalism, and how we need to be a lot more critical about, we shouldn't, we've all been kind of dealing with these bigger companies, and I think turning a blind eye to their broader, what they've been a part of, and how I think VR will then, it's impossible for it to be divorced from that. And I think that's what concerns me, is those broader struggles that are coming up with something like surveillance capitalism.
I think that's when we talk about interoperability and transparency. And the interoperability is this idea that your data is yours and that you can take your data anywhere you want to whatever platform that you decide to go to, and that they don't own your data and that you own your data. And I think, your personal shift in, who you are, and that if you're going to make that deal, you're part of the deal. I think that's a super interesting premise that might offer some ways to frame this. And also, Jonathan Zittrain, who's teaches at the law school at Harvard, he's a really bright guy, talks also about what is the responsibility of the platforms, and that is, holding your information in the same way an accountant has a duty to you to not reveal your data, that these platforms should assume the same type of role. And he's been successful at getting some of this stuff passed through Congress. And I think that that's also a way to think about positive movements forward.
Yeah, I would say, over this time in COVID, what became extremely concerning for me, we've worked a couple of years now with Wild Immersion, endorsed by Jane Goodall, nothing more inspiring than Jane Goodall. And during COVID, she gave a lot of illuminating talks about what's often being forgotten in this is that these pandemics keep originating from us messing with nature. And that's SARS, MERS, Ebola, HIV, AIDS, COVID. And we are going to continue to see pandemics and experience pandemics like this if we keep messing with nature. And Akashinga, which is kind of the all-female anti-poaching unit of International Anti-Poaching Foundation, we did panels with them, and they were discussing this open letter to humanity that they did, kind of begging people to understand that these pandemics are preventable, and that if we protect nature and stop messing with nature, that we can prevent future pandemics. But, what we saw during COVID was also an explosion of hoaxes about COVID. And, seeing technology being a place where that explosion of hoaxes led to just this firestorm of misinformation, I would really beg people to think about how they're being manipulated in those situations and how that manipulation affects the work of people like Jane Goodall and those frontline anti-poaching rangers like Akashinga.
I think that is an absolutely great point, Tiffany. I think that this is not only, we're looking at more and more of these pandemics unless we address exactly these issues.
So in conclusion, I'd love to learn what your visions are for the future of VR, not simply as an advanced technology, but as a medium for the betterment of humankind and the environment. What are you working towards with this technology?
There was a paradox that a technology that supposedly isolates you, and how we think about technology generally is that, it can isolate you in a way by putting on a headset, that in some ways that could make people understand humans better and to connect with each other. And so for me, my hope is that whatever we think of going with VR in the future, that it kind of challenges those sort of binary ways of thinking, where we're in the real world and that's virtual, and this is escapism and this is not. I really look to a lot of young people, who think about, gender in a different way and gender fluidity and challenging binary ways of thinking in society. And I think my hope is that VR is a part of breaking that down rather than reinforcing those sort of binary ways of thinking. Because I think that's kind of what our problem is a little bit, is this is good, this is bad, this is how it is. And I think everything has become very polarizing because there hasn't been that ability to think in different ways. And, for me, I still think, like we said, VR is still a progression, is different than other mediums, but it borrows from all the great storytelling mediums before us. And, for me, when I read a great book, I'm feeling like I come back a changed and better person who can view my world and my reality in a different way. And I expect the same thing out of VR. Jaron Lanier always says he loves keeping a fresh cut flowers and likes to see them the first thing after he's in VR because he sees them in more beautiful ways. And I think that's what this technology can do in its best way, in its best form.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I have to say, like, especially during COVID and all the kind of like shutdowns that have happened and how emerging tech has kind of helped people connect through this, I fell back in love with emerging technology. I've always loved it. But we also get to see some super exciting things. And I will say that too, is like, I hope with all of the negative news that people hear about the environment, that they also understand that there are just extraordinary solutions for so many environmental issues. And Pfeiffer, you said something really wonderful before when we were kind of talking about this, is that VR is like such a perfect place to envision a future where we are living more symbiotically with nature. A Brighter Future is a project that we've been working with Mary Matheson. And I love what they've done with this, where they've taken people into all of these spaces where people are, cleaning up the garbage patch and creating vertical forests and creating these landscapes where we can really learn to live on nature's terms, which I think is going to be critical to us being a sustainable species. And there's a really wonderful moment that Rob Stewart from Sharkwater shared. Like, this place could be paradise if we designed it the right way, and it could be paradise for us and for millions of other species. So that's what I love to see in emerging technology and visions through VR.
And, if we can take this moment that we're living in, where we're all been separated by this pandemic, is there ways that we can connect? And it's kind of been interesting to see how many people are reaching into the virtual worlds and virtual technologies to try to connect and see each other and experience things together. I mean, interestingly, the Sundance Film Festival had their largest audience ever with everything virtual. And I think that these are good things. There are ways for us to connect. And there are ways for us to, we know that somebody's going to come up with way more interesting ways to tell stories using this technology than we could ever even imagine. But I think that's the exciting part about all this, that we're just beginning to understand how we can connect in virtual ways that will be, both better sometimes and different sometimes and worse sometimes. But it provides a whole landscape of opportunity, and I think that that's the really cool part about this. We haven't even talked about things like Apple and their new LiDAR capture phones, and that they're going to be making a headset. No doubt, all the data is indicating that we're going to go that direction. So it isn't just a pie in the sky idea. This is happening. This is real. We are going to be shifting into integrating extended reality, AR and VR, in our everyday life. So I feel like my job, and I think my fellow panelists, Gabo and Tiffany, would agree that we need to be also thinking about how we can use the technology for for good as well as fun and games and connection and play and everything else. But also, to both tell great stories, but also help us envision what the future might look like, the future that we want.
So thank you all so much. This has been very inspirational to me, and thank you for your time. For all of you who are watching, feel free to visit this site for links to all of the references and all of the work that we've talked about today. See you all next year in person.
Can't wait to see you in person. Bye, you guys.
Yay, can't
Bye-bye.
wait. Thank you so much.